So, Vince, let's talk some Notre Dame defense.
Yes.
Here's my big hot take that people are not going to like. As I broke down the game plan, and again, I'm breaking the game plan down for what their goal is, not what I would like. There's a difference between what I like and what is effective based on what the coach wants to run. Game plan wise, I had no issue with last night, and I'll explain why. Number one, I felt early in the game they were much more aggressive out of their three-man fronts. We saw a lot more of Jordan Patelho in three-man and more of Isaiah Foskey on the line.
I did notice that.
Yeah. And they were aggressive. Now, they weren't perfect, but there was a lot of times where Isaiah was playing on the second level and he was coming downhill and attacking more, which I liked. We talked before the game that North Carolina is a great deep ball team. They hit 2 deep balls. One was on an illegal pick that wasn't called. The other was on a blown coverage.
Yep.
They didn't hit any other deep balls the rest of the game.
Correct.
Notre Dame played more cover 4, and that is so cover 4 is more of an off coverage. When I say cover 4, Vince, I'm talking old school cover 4, not like modern cover 4 with the double robber. I'm talking like old school cover 4 where they get the snap, everybody's working back. Now that got him beat a couple times. Cam Hart got beat on the comeback route on a 3rd and 9.
4 guys, each responsible for a quarter of the field.
Deep.
Right? I just want to make sure everybody understands
deep.
that.
Right. Yeah. A modern cover 4 is more of those guys are play like more alleys. Now, it ended up being old school cover 4 if there's an automatic vertical release, but a lot of times they'll kind of play the alleys run first. If it's play action, then the corner's got to kind of play the post, right? Where in an old school cover 4, the safeties play the post, correct, Vince? Mm-hmm. In a new school cover 4, the safeties have to play the post on certain things, right? So, again, now old school cover 4, if you run double post or a drive and a post over top, the corner's going to have to play the post, right? But you understand the point that I'm making. The primary middle of the field defenders are the safeties, and that's what they were doing last night. And that's why a lot of times they were not getting deep shots.
Right.
And why they had to kind of scheme their way into some deep shots.
And they actually stopped calling vertical routes, North Carolina.
Because the second half they didn't call a ton. The one they did was a play action not trick play, but like the pump fake with it wasn't a traditional deep shot. Right. They did that to get the outside to get the guys to bite in. That was the only thing that could get them to bite in was that play. And it was well designed and well called. I thought Phil Longo called a really good game last night, and he adjusted quickly to Notre Dame. Notre Dame countered back. I thought that they took away what Carolina does best, which opened up some Sam Howell runs, and they didn't execute effectively. I thought he put a lot of trust on the front 6, meaning the 4 down and the 2 backers, to make more plays, and they didn't make enough of them.
They had trouble finishing at times.
They didn't make enough of them. But
at the quarterback, I should say.
Schematically,
yeah,
I had no issues with last night. I think now, again, execution is also under the coach's domain. It's your job to get those guys prepared. Absolutely. So this is not I'm taking Marcus Freeman did a great job. What I'm saying is Marcus Freeman put a good game plan together last night, in my opinion. What the coaches didn't do a good enough job of at all 3 levels was preparing them to then execute that game plan. That was the issue. And it was even like the tunnel screen that went for 31 yards. There was one guy on defense that had any clue that they were running that tunnel screen. Even though it was obvious to the snap that they were running that tunnel screen backside, the backers over pursued. The D-line had no concept. The safeties had no concept. The pump fake. There were so many missed out that turning tight ends loose. I mean, that wasn't the only time they got beat on that play. They also beat Notre Dame with that pump fake early, but it went to a tight end. I thought there was a lot of mistakes, a lot of sloppy play last night, which again falls under the purview of the coaches. I can't sit there and say that the receivers playing fundamentally unsound and the O-line playing unfundamentally sound is Dell Alexander and Jeff Quinn's fault, but then not say the same thing about the defense right now. Last night was more of an aberration compared to what we've seen all season. But here's a couple things that people aren't going to like. 34 points was too much for me. That was North Carolina's 4th lowest point total of the season. Okay. they have to execute a lot better than they did last night.
Agreed.
But I feel a lot better about a game like being able to fix what we saw last night than I felt about whether or not Notre Dame could fix the things that was going on for the offense the first 6 games of the year. Because structurally there were problems. Fundamentally, like at the foundational level, there were problems that needed to be addressed. Foundationally, I don't think there's issues with what they're doing, even though it's not my preferred style of attack. I don't think it's Marcus Freeman's preferred style of attack because they're not being super aggressive. But they have to figure out a way to better execute that when they play Virginia, because it's going to be a very similar game plan against Virginia. I thought they executed the game plan very well against USC. They did not execute against North Carolina. The difference, one team had a mobile quarterback, the other one didn't. Simple as that.
And he was super mobile last night.
And they're going to pay some more. I don't know if Brennan Armstrong's going to be healthy enough to play against Notre Dame, but he can run. Jeff Sims can definitely run. A couple teams are going to play don't have mobile. Well, really one, Stanford. Navy has option. It's a different animal.
Obviously, it's a different conversation.
So, and we don't know what they're going to face in the postseason, right? But they're going to have to figure this out because this is the more and more teams are having mobile quarterbacks, and they have to be able to find answers to being aggressive, but also not letting quarterbacks just grain free. That was the issue for me. I thought defensive line wise, Vince, there were way too many missed gaps. Mm-hmm. They were running. Remember, we said they should run twists and stuff before the game. They ran a decent number of those. But what was happening is Kurt Heinisch at times was not getting over on his, and then other times the loopers weren't getting over, and it was opening up these big holes. And so they weren't finishing the twist the way North Carolina's defensive line was. That to me was an execution problem, not a scheme problem. So overall, Vince, what is your response and your thoughts on that hot take right there by me?
No, I agree with you. I didn't really have an issue with the scheme last night watching it live. It was the execution. It was the lack of execution that I was seeing. And it was, look, if Notre Dame finishes around the quarterback last night, every time that they got near him and got there, and I'll even go this far, every time they got their hand on him, if they finish that, we're talking about a completely different defensive situation here. Too many times they didn't finish around Sam Howell. And part of that is because they just didn't execute. And part of it is because Sam Howell's pretty freaking good. Like sometimes, again, you got to tip your cap, right? I mean, he had a heck of a game. He accounted for over 400 yards by himself. And so you have to, but at the same time, they should have brought him down on numerous occasions where he turned it into a first down or he got away and was able to throw it.
It was more about them than him.
Correct. Absolutely correct. They allowed him to do what he did to a degree, right? And again, I give him all the credit in the world. He had a great game, but they helped him with that. They propped him up. And again, if they finish every time they put their hands on him, we're having a completely different conversation, and they probably score in the low 20s. Okay. And that means Notre Dame wins by 20. And we're not necessarily praising Marcus Freeman, but we're not having the same conversation.
Right. So because he's responsible. Him and his staff are responsible for both aspects.
No question.
What we're trying to make sure you understand is last night's defense was not good enough because Notre Dame should be holding them to worse than their fourth best. What I'm trying to say is there's some context. This wasn't like, people are like, I literally had people telling me this was a Brian Van Gorder. No, if Brian Van Gorder was a defensive coordinator, they'd have scored 60 last night. Okay. So let's chill out a little bit on that.
Right. Agreed.
The other part too, is that Notre Dame started ripping off some big plays that kept giving North Carolina the ball back. They scored 13 points in the first half because they only had 4 possessions.
Right.
Second half, Notre Dame starts ripping off some big plays and they start playing. They're going to give up points, but again, they were still in control for a decent chunk of that game. So the point being that we're going to discuss some things that were the problem last night. The reason that I want to start off with that is because if it's fundamentals and technique that's the issue, that can get addressed a lot quicker than our scheme isn't good and it's creating problems and we have to shift gears, which is something that can require a bye week like we saw in offense. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the difference. It's like, okay, we got to tackle better. Why were we missing? Well, a lot of it, Vince, I thought there was a lot of guys coming out of control. Guys like flying in and no coming to balance. And then the opposite was happening with the same. So Linebackers and D linemen, I thought, were playing out of control. JD Bertrand missed several tackles last night because I just thought he was out of control, took bad angles, and he's like left kind of flying in the air, but like with the guy running through his arm, right?
Yeah.
I thought we saw that up front. The defensive linemen weren't arriving at the ball with force, which was allowing the quarterback to get off of them. The secondary was kind of the opposite. They were passive on the back end at safety and corner.
They were worried about getting beat. Like I think there was a real fear of, man, I can't let anything get behind me. I need to make sure everything stays in front of me. And so I'm going to take that extra second to make sure that happens, as opposed to coming up and then getting beat over the top. I do think that was part of it. And part of that is because 14 was on the sideline, and somebody said, I think it was in the chat, that Kyle Hamilton is an eraser of mistakes.
Yes.
That's a fact. That is a cold hard fact. And guys can play looser when they know that Kyle Hamilton is in the game.
Right.
I mean,
the defensive coordinator can as well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with that.
So, I mean, I'd say if you had Kyle, you probably take at least a touchdown off the board last night.
I think that's fair.
Just
I think
overall,
he blows up that tunnel screen.
Even if it's not that, just in general, something he would have made some sort of play that takes a touchdown off. Otherwise, he's not as good as you think if he's not worthy of – if the points are going to be the same whether he plays or not, then he's not that impactful of a player.
Sure.
And that's obviously not the case. But I thought the safety play – I thought DJ Brown played well outside of the angle he took on that 53-yard touchdown. That was really bad.
Yeah,
and he's not a player, as we've said, he's not a player that can afford to take a bad angle. He's just
not fast,
not athletic enough.
Yeah.
Overall. And to me, the just the lack of discipline coming up, but then other times, like the 31-yard touchdown run, the manner in which Houston Griffith played that was, I don't even know if I have an adjective to use. It's not going to be insulting, but it was
it's not good.
It's not good. There was other times where I thought Houston came into the hole looking for a block, like looking for a blocker, I should say, as opposed to looking for the ball.
And you hesitate when you do that.
Drew White did that a lot yesterday.
I agree.
That was an issue for him last year, a ton. And he hasn't shown that version of himself this year. He did that a lot last night. Like
right. And
he
explain
was running
that
into blockers. So that's it wasn't so much hesitating. It's like he couldn't find the ball. And so what he was doing is when you see the ball, you have a gap you have to attack, right? Every call kind of has – now sometimes it's two.
Sure.
So if I'm a linebacker on the left, if the run is to me, I have the play side B gap. If the run is away from me, I have the play side A gap, or I have the backside A gap, right? You have to play your gap. When you can find the ball, you play your gap with a focus on getting to the ball. So I see the ball, so I'm going to attack this gap, but I'm going to attack it I'm inside, or I'm taking on this guard, but I know where the ball is going, so I'm going to hit him in a certain way that forces the ball back inside or forces a bounce. Drew didn't look like he knew where the ball was going last night. I could be wrong, but this is what it looked like to me, and that was forcing him to just hit blockers. Like, okay, this is my gap. I'm not sure where the ball is, so I'm going to take on this guard. And as the running back's running right past him. And he had no clue, because usually when you get beat like that, you're still kind of trying to at least reach for the ball. No thought of that, because I don't think he knew where the ball was. The linebacker play was really bad. They had a really tough time. They could not figure out if the ball was being handed off or thrown. They were having a brutal time of that, and it created a passivity that caused a lot of problems. This was the most blockable. The linebackers last night looked like what the linebackers looked like all last year. We haven't seen that from them this year. Even when they've made the mistakes, like when JD Bertrand's made mistakes this year, it's been aggressive mistakes. When Drew White has made mistakes this year, they've been aggressive mistakes. Last night looked more like last year. And that tells me they weren't comfortable with their – like, I liked the game plan. I don't think the players were always comfortable with their role in it.
Sure.
Is how it looked. I could be wrong on that, right? But that's how it looked, the way they executed at the linebacker level. When I say players, I'm referring to the linebackers.
Right.
That was a rough night in that regards, Vince.
Yep. Yeah,
Which is why you saw that 53-yard touchdown, just like the Red Sea parting.
Yes,
because
they all
were
ran into
running
blocks.
into blockers.
Every one of them ran into again, you got to give credit to North Carolina.
And catching the blockers a little bit too. That's the difference.
And that's what it is. I called it a hesitation when it almost looks like they're looking for a block, because they don't go into it as aggressively and as strong as they should. It's like, oh, he's going to block. It's like you kind of hesitate a little bit, and then when you take that block on, you can't get off of it because you're not physically attacking that block. And you hear the term block destruction, right? There's no block destruction when you just take on a block. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened on that run. And it was very disappointing for me.
Cornerback play. It's a problem, Vince. And I thought Tariq Bracy was solid.
Yes, I agree.
I think the 2 times where he got beat, neither were necessarily on him. I don't care who you are, unless you are a top 15 overall draft pick at corner, you're not getting jammed illegally like that and running with Josh Downs.
Right.
Not going to happen. The tunnel screen, I think he could have played better. He's got to get off blocks better. His coverage, I thought, was sound. Clarence was just kind of okay. I thought they did a good job of not putting him in any man coverage situations last night.
Right.
Cam Hart was solid, okay, but they're just not getting great play right now. Teams have figured out how to avoid Cam Hart.
Right.
And
when that's the case, you need somebody else to step up.
Right. And just Ramon Henderson, to me, he's long, he's athletic, but he just has no feel for the game. Even if you just take away the blown coverage, because I don't know if it was him or Cam Hart, it looked to me like it was Ramon.
Yeah, I agree. Because
Cam was outside, I say that, Ramon was in the slot. Explain it. Yes.
The reason I say that is more from my body language standpoint. Cam Hart looked pissed, and he didn't look pissed at himself. He looked pissed at somebody else, and it looked like it was like, man, what are you doing? Kind of upset. You know what I mean? And that, to me, when we don't know what the call is, the reaction of the players can sometimes tell you what the call is. Mm-hmm. And I felt like from that reaction that Ramon was supposed to stay back and Cam was supposed to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean,
which is normally how you play it,
correct?
Because it was, that's normally how you're going to play that. Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Here's a great, this isn't a super chat, but this is a great comment from Nolan Sanchez. I compare playing I've never heard anyone ever compare football and golf appropriately. Every time I've ever heard anyone say compare football and golf, I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. First time that I don't think this is great. Now, I don't know if this is how it works in golf because I don't play golf, and when I do, it's not really playing golf, it's hacking. Okay.
Right.
I compare playing aggressive in football to playing aggressive in golf. It's not aiming at every pin. It's picking a spot and playing aggressively to your spot. Same here. That is a great analogy, especially when we're talking about linebackers. It's not so much just flying to the ball, right? And this is what we're trying to say. It's you got to fly to the ball with purpose, with direction. Hey, I've got to attack the B gap. The ball's going here. The ball's going in the C gap. So what I got to do is I got to take on my blocker in the B gap and blow them up and blow them into the ball.
Correct.
Right? So if everyone's just running to the ball, then what you have is elementary school soccer, right? Where it's like, it's just this mass of people all kind of going in the same direction, right? Magnet ball. There has to be a sense of purpose within the game plan. And so, but what we were seeing last night was there was none of that. They were just running right into the straight in the middle of blockers with no sense of where the ball's coming and that's the issue. So Nolan, that's a tremendous analogy. And to me, right on point. Here's another comment I want to address that's along these lines from Jeff Hoy. Jeff asks, I know the coaches are responsible for preparing the players to properly execute the game plan. At what point do you hold the players responsible for their lack of proper execution? This is a great question. Players always have a role in execution to a degree. Here's my rule of thumb for when a coach is at fault. Now, number one, a position coach is always ultimately responsible for how his players perform in a game. And that is one of two ways, right? One is it's your job to make sure that you've done the best job you can preparing that player. Two, if he's not executing the way you've prepared him, find somebody else.
Correct.
Right? Now,
if it's a
when I
systemic
look
problem,
at,
then
right,
that's on the coach.
So here's what I mean. So if I'm watching the Notre Dame offensive line, and I'll use two examples, right? I look at the 2016 offensive line, which was not a great offensive line, but all season the problem was one position, right guard. And they kept trying different players. It was Colin McGovern. They tried different guys, and those players were not getting it done. But McGlinchey was playing well. Q was playing well. I thought Mustafa had a good year that year, and I thought Bars had a good year at right tackle. But the line just was never played its potential because they couldn't get the right guard thing figured out. To me, that's more of a player thing, right? Then you look at what we saw a lot of this year where it was just issues across the board. Everybody's having that problem. Okay. Same thing could happen at corner. You have a corner that just bites on something every time. None of the other corners do that. Right. I'm usually going to put that on that one corner because he's really the only one having that problem. Or maybe it's a second guy on a 9 to 10 man depth chart. But when all the corners or all the linebackers or most of them are having that issue, that's more of a coaching problem. So let's take last night, for example. If it was just the safeties that had a bad game, I'd say, okay, Chris O'Leary didn't do a good job. Or if it was just one safety, I'd say, DJ or Houston or whoever didn't have a good game, right? When it's just the Mike linebacker, I may say, hey, Drew had a bad night, right? Which we've said before at times this year. What we saw last night, was all three levels having similar problems with tackling. We saw the D-line miss tackles. We saw the linebackers miss tackles. We saw corners miss tackles. We saw safeties miss tackles.
Yep.
To me, that is a coaching problem. Clearly, whatever you're doing, you didn't do enough work on that. The line stunts not hitting. Okay, whatever you were doing in your preparation kept you from your players from executing the way you needed to do. So yes, that's why I say I view last night as more of a coaching problem. And I'll be willing to bet you that Coach Freeman would say the same thing.
Right, absolutely.
Great coaches usually are more hard. Okay, so
look, that's what Kelly said at the post game. He's like, defensively, it was a coaching problem.
Well, but Kelly tends to
but he did
the
say
bus
that
at times in that regards. He's been kind of blaming the defense this year, even when I didn't think the defense was a fault. But at least, yeah, I get your point. But I've known assistant coaches at Notre Dame recently that I could never write something unless I said that guy sucks and needs to be fired. I could not have said, which I would never do. I could not have been more critical of him than he was to himself when he'd call me after games and we talk about what I saw, what he saw, right? Because his thing was nobody. If anyone's holding me to a higher standard than me, then that's a me problem, right? Marcus Freeman did not get to where he got to at a young age by not being very critical and thoughtful of the job he does on a daily basis. I guarantee you, Marcus Freeman looked at last night and said, "We didn't execute for crap."
Right.
That's on me.
Yeah, he didn't get a good night's sleep last night. I guarantee it. I guarantee it.
And not because he's like freaking Drew. Like you know how I knew a coach was bad? I could tell within like a week of working with a guy if he was a bad coach when I coached, is the guy that were always getting pissed at players.
Right.
It's like every one of your kids pisses you off because none of them are doing right. Maybe you're the problem. You know what I mean? Or we'd be in a staff meeting and be like, hey, every time something goes wrong with the offensive line, we had a line coach once. It was just like, oh, freaking so-and-so and freaking so-and-so. And it's just like, hey, man, we keep having the same problem and it's your guys. Maybe they're not the problem. Maybe you are, right? There's nothing about Marcus Freeman that strikes me as being that kind of guy.
Right.
I guarantee it wasn't freaking Drew and freaking J. Now, where he's going to feel that way is J.D. Bertrand's personal foul. Yeah. That was just dumb. You don't every player in the country knows you don't come down through a quarterback when you dive.
Right.
When you jump, you come down like this or you just leave them up.
Right.
Right. When you jump for the ball, you don't come down. You're not going to block a pass going like this. You block a pass going like this.
You're looking to get a cheap one in.
Look like I'm on a roller coaster. But you stay high. You don't come down through. I don't fault him for like last week, I don't fault J.D. Bertrand for that personal foul. To me, it's a bad rule or a bad call. that one was 100% on JD because nobody else does that. We saw defensive linemen jumping up like this all night last night, and they weren't coming down like that on Sam Howell. He's maybe pissed about that, but I don't think he's necessarily holding his players accountable for all the other tackling things. I mean, when your whole team's not tackling, you're going to look in the mirror and say, I did a terrible job getting these guys ready to play.
Yeah.
Good coaches do that, and I think Marcus Freeman's a really good coach.
Agreed.
I'll bet you Mike Ellison's doing the same thing. Man, I got to figure out a way to get these guys to finish better on the ball.
Absolutely.
Guaranteed he's sitting there saying that to himself. And I guarantee you Mike Mickens is pissed at the job he did to get his guys ready to play last night. All of them. Same with Chris O'Leary, because that's what good coaches do.
Right.
And so I hope, Jeff, that kind of answers your question. But that's why we say that even though schematically it was good, I still feel like that's only half of the job of a coach is the scheme. If the scheme's great, but the players can't execute it, then the scheme is useless.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.